Have you ever felt like inexplicably stuck? As if some invisible force from your past was just dictating your present? Maybe subtly shaping your thoughts, your feelings, even physical sensations. What if your body was holding on to memories that your conscious mind couldn't even begin to recall? Storing the echoes of experiences that were maybe just too overwhelming to process at the time. Today, we're taking a deep dive into Bessel van der Kolk's really seminal and honestly transformative work, The Body Keeps the Score: Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. And this isn't just about, intellectually understanding trauma. It's this urgent, profound exploration of how horrific experiences, whether it's a single catastrophic event or a prolonged, insidious pattern, literally reshape our minds, our brains, and our very bodies. But maybe more importantly, we're here to uncover the groundbreaking new possibilities that exist to truly heal and reclaim a full, vibrant life.
Yeah, absolutely. Our mission in this deep dive is really to unpack the fascinating scientific discoveries that van der Kolk lays out. We're particularly focusing on neuroplasticity, that incredible inherent capacity of the brain to actually change and reorganize itself all through our lives. We'll explore how this scientific understanding gives us a powerful roadmap for helping trauma survivors not just, cope, but to truly feel fully alive again, to step out of that shadow of the past into a present where they have agency and connection. And we'll look at three fundamental avenues for transformation he talks about. First, there's the top-down approach, which is, talking, understanding, making meaning of experiences. Second, the role of medication and maybe some of the cutting-edge technologies that can subtly change how the brain processes information. And third, and this one's perhaps the most surprising for many, the bottom-up strategies. These work directly through the body itself, allowing for these deep visceral shifts that, well, words alone often just can't achieve.
Right. So whether you're navigating complex emotional landscapes yourself, or maybe you're just curious about the remarkable resilience of the human spirit, or you simply want to understand the profound and often invisible impact of past events on present lives. This deep dive offers, we hope, a powerful shortcut to being well informed. We'll be sharing some surprising facts, really powerful anecdotes, and actionable insights that we really hope will resonate deeply with you. Okay, let's dig into this. We're starting with what van der Kolk powerfully calls the enduring shadow of trauma. And like you said, this isn't just about feeling sad or angry. It's about people becoming hopelessly stuck, frozen in a place they desperately wish they could escape, often without even realizing why. So what exactly are these pervasive symptoms, the ones that go far beyond, typical emotional distress?
Well, it's far more insidious, really, and comprehensive than just sadness or anger. Trauma infiltrates like every aspect of a person's being: their sleep, their relationships, their very sense of safety in the world, everything. Van der Kolk illustrates this so vividly through the story of Tom, a Vietnam veteran. Tom found relief only in really reckless, dangerous behavior, like driving his Harley-Davidson at these impossibly high speeds, pushing the limits of physical danger just to feel something other than the internal pain. Night offered no escape either. His sleep was constantly shattered by the same terrifying nightmare and ambush in the rice paddy where his entire platoon was killed or wounded. He also had these vivid, waking flashbacks. He'd see dead Vietnamese children right there in front of him. These nightmares, the flashbacks, they were so horrific he actually dreaded falling asleep. He'd often stay up most of the night, drinking heavily, only to be found passed out on the living room couch in the morning. His wife and boys just tiptoeing around him, living in constant fear of disturbing his fragile peace. His internal world was just a living hell, a battlefield he couldn't leave behind.
And what's particularly poignant about Tom's story, if I remember correctly, was his deep reluctance to take medication. It was tied to this invisible burden he felt he had to carry.
Precisely. When they asked him why he hadn't taken the prescribed pills for his nightmares, Tom's response was just heartbreakingly profound. He said, "I realize that if I take the pills and the nightmares go away, I will have abandoned my friends and their deaths will have been in vain."
Mm.
He felt he needed to be a living memorial to his friends who died in Vietnam. It just
Wow.
illustrates the profound psychological and really moral grip of trauma,
Mm.
where a survivor can feel this almost sacred loyalty to the past, viewing relief itself as a betrayal. It's a powerful insight into how trauma can distort a person's whole sense of identity and purpose, preventing them from living their own lives. And van der Kolk reflects on this himself, wondering if his own uncle and father, who both seemed sort of disconnected and unable to find real pleasure in life, maybe harbored similar unaddressed trauma, perhaps even silent nightmares and flashbacks. He also connected this to his own mother, whose frightening behavior and even fainting spells, when questioned about her past, suggested her own childhood trauma. It's just a stark reminder of how trauma, when it's left unaddressed, doesn't just affect the individual. It can subtly, sometimes overtly, echo down through generations, shaping family dynamics in profound ways that are often invisible to those trapped within them.
And it's so important to remember that these deep hidden wounds aren't just confined to battlefields. We're talking about trauma in everyday lives too, right? Long before it even had a name or was widely understood as a specific condition.
Absolutely. Think of Bill, a medic who served in Vietnam from 1967 to 1971. For decades after his service, he struggled immensely with this inexplicable rage and an edginess that just plagued him, particularly when he was working in a hospital's burn unit. He had no idea these issues were linked to his Vietnam experiences because, remarkably, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, wasn't even a recognized diagnosis yet.
Right, the term didn't exist.
Exactly. So when he finally sought help many years later, after the birth of his first son triggered this overwhelming emotional crisis, doctors were actually on the verge of institutionalizing him. They were going to use powerful antipsychotic drugs. They initially misdiagnosed him with schizophrenia,
Oh my goodness.
which is just a devastating mislabeling that would have profoundly altered the course of his life, potentially locking him away from his family and any chance of genuine healing. This painful example really powerfully highlights how desperately society and the medical community needed a framework, a language, to understand and respond to these deep hidden wounds that were afflicting so many people. Without that framework, profound suffering was just often misunderstood and, well, pathologized.
That's a really powerful distinction, misdiagnosing a trauma response as something entirely different, like a severe mental illness. So, this idea of suffering from memories, when did that really start to emerge, and how did it challenge the medical views at the time?
It's truly fascinating how early some of these core insights actually were, sort of laying the groundwork for future breakthroughs. As early as 1895, long before modern neuroscience and brain imaging, Sigmund Freud, just observing his patients, made this remarkably profound and accurate observation. He stated simply, "This man is suffering from memories."
Wow, 1895.
Yeah, this concise phrase just precisely captured the essence of what Bill, for instance, and countless others were experiencing. This enduring, debilitating struggle rooted not in some inherent mental defect, but in the unprocessed echoes of past events. Bill's initial misdiagnosis of schizophrenia, which nearly led to him being institutionalized and heavily medicated, starkly demonstrates the critical need for an accurate understanding of what was truly afflicting these individuals. The shift from seeing these complex, often bizarre symptoms as inherent mental illness to understanding them as understandable, if extreme, responses to past overwhelming events was a monumental paradigm-shifting step in psychology and psychiatry. It moved us away from a purely biological defect model to one that really considered the impact of lived experience.
And that leads us right to the concept of the preverbal nature of trauma. What happens when an experience is just so overwhelming, so terrifying, that it simply can't be put into words in the moment it occurs? That sounds like a core, almost primal concept here.
It truly is foundational to understanding trauma. Kolk emphasizes that all trauma is preverbal. Imagine a terror so profound that it just bypasses the language centers of the brain entirely. Shakespeare, with his uncanny insight into the human psyche, captured this speechless terror centuries ago in Macbeth, writing, "O horror, 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 tongue nor heart cannot conceive nor name thee." It's a state where the rational linguistic part of the brain literally shuts down in the face of overwhelming threat, leaving only raw, unprocessed sensation and emotion. You see this vividly in real-world examples. Victims sitting mute, just frozen, in emergency rooms after assaults or accidents, unable to utter a sound or describe what happened, or traumatized children who literally lose their tongues and refuse to speak, or combat soldiers staring blankly with these hollow, unseeing eyes into a void, utterly disconnected from their surroundings. Their bodies are present, but their minds, their ability to articulate, are just elsewhere.
So it's not just a difficulty with speaking or finding the right words. It's something much deeper about how the memory itself is formed, or maybe not formed in a coherent way.
Exactly. This is the very essence of trauma. The overwhelming experience is split off, it's fragmented, preventing it from being integrated into the ongoing, coherent narrative of life that makes up our sense of self and continuity. Think of Stan and Ute Lawrence, who were in a horrific car accident. Years later, when Stan was put in a brain scanner and prompted to recall the event, he didn't just remember it, he relived it. He came out of the scanner sweating profusely, heart racing, blood pressure skyrocketing, saying, "This was just the way I felt during the accident. I was sure I was going to die, and there was nothing I could do to save myself." This isn't normal memory recall. This illustrates the fragmented, raw nature of traumatic memories. They are not like ordinary memories that you can recall and reflect upon without fully reliving the original terror. Instead, they are these dissociated sensory fragments, raw images, sounds, smells, physical sensations, intense emotional states that are stored separately. And when they're triggered, they burst forth as flashbacks, apparently unmodified by time or context. Brain imaging actually shows that during these relivings, the brain's right side, which is associated with emotion and physical sensation, lights up intensely, while the left side, responsible for putting things into words and creating a linear narrative, largely deactivates.
So it goes offline.
It essentially goes offline. It's a memory, yes, but it's a body memory, not a verbal one.
That's truly chilling to be perpetually stuck in that state of reliving.
Mhm.
And what about something as fundamental as our ability to imagine? To play, to envision possibilities. How does trauma impact that crucial, creative, flexible part of our minds?
This is one of the most unexpected and I think profoundly impactful findings of trauma research. Kolk's research involved using Rorschach ink blot tests with Vietnam veterans. Normally, when you look at an ink blot, your mind kind of freely plays with it, forming different images, connecting to various ideas.
Right, you see butterflies or whatever.
Exactly. But what they found in traumatized individuals was a really distinct and disturbing pattern. These veterans tended to superimpose their trauma on everything. They struggled immensely to decipher their surroundings beyond the lens of past threat. There was very little in between, either a blank, unseeing response or seeing their trauma directly, explicitly in the ink blots.
Hmm.
What this revealed was a profound loss of mental flexibility, a kind of cognitive rigidity. The men who saw nothing in the blots had, in a sense, lost the capacity to let their minds play, to be spontaneously creative. But interestingly, so had the others, because in viewing explicit scenes from the past within the ambiguous blots, they weren't really displaying imagination. They were just replaying an old reel, a fixed, distressing script.
Right, just projecting the past.
Exactly. This indicates that trauma doesn't just affect memory or emotion. It deeply impacts the imagination itself, that vital capacity to envision different futures, to find new meanings, or to simply navigate ambiguity with flexibility. It's as if their minds are so preoccupied with the past, locked in a state of hypervigilance or shutdown, that they just can't freely explore new possibilities or interpret ambiguous information flexibly in the present.
It sounds like the human brain, after trauma, just gets stuck in this relentless loop, unable to fully engage with the present or imagine a different future, always being pulled back to the past. Which brings us to the formal recognition of this suffering. What was the critical turning point that really began to shift how we understood trauma, leading to a specific diagnosis?
Well, the major, indeed revolutionary turning point arrived in 1980. This was the year a really tenacious and dedicated group of Vietnam veterans, powerfully aided by some visionary New York psychoanalysts like James Shatan and Robert J. Lifton, successfully lobbied the American Psychiatric Association. Their relentless advocacy culminated in the creation of a brand new diagnosis: post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD.
Finally, the name.
Finally, a name. This was monumental. For the first time, this cluster of common debilitating symptoms observed in veterans, the flashbacks, the nightmares, the hypervigilance, the emotional numbness, was given a legitimate medical name. This act of naming provided a much-needed conceptual framework to identify and understand the immense suffering of people overwhelmed by horror and helplessness. Crucially, this recognition wasn't just symbolic, it spurred an explosion of research, and vitally, a concerted effort to find effective, evidence-based treatments, finally validating experiences that had long been dismissed or just misdiagnosed. Yeah.
That must have been an enormous relief for so many people who felt like their experiences were invisible or unique or just symptoms of some other broader mental health issue. It gave them a shared language and identity.
It absolutely was a huge step forward, offering validation and hope. However, even with this crucial new diagnosis, there were still significant limitations in the early psychiatric approach. Kolk, recounting his experiences on morning rounds in psychiatric hospitals, highlights this pretty starkly. The focus was almost entirely on patients' immediate, observable symptoms: how to manage acute suicidal thoughts, control aggressive outbursts, or curb self-destructive behaviors.
Putting out fires.
Exactly, just putting out fires. What was strikingly absent was any meaningful attention paid to the ecology of their lives. Their accomplishments, their aspirations, who they cared for, loved, or hated, what truly motivated them, what kept them stuck in their suffering, or what brought them peace. The profound underlying causes of their despair and helplessness, like childhood assault, abandonment, or pervasive violence, were often shockingly ignored. even though later studies would confirm that more than half of people seeking psychiatric care had experienced such traumas as children.
Wow, more than half.
Yeah, the approach was still predominantly symptom-focused, rather than truly understanding the root experiences that shaped their entire existence.
So, we've talked about the external manifestation and the profound psychological impact of trauma, but let's peer deeper into the brain itself. What exactly is happening on a neurological level when someone experiences a flashback, for example, or is constantly on edge, trapped in that state of hypervigilance from past trauma?
Neuroimaging studies, particularly with the advent of fMRI, have offered incredible, really unprecedented insights into this. When traumatized individuals experience flashbacks, their brains literally light up in very specific telltale areas. The emotional brain, which includes ancient structures like the reptilian brain and the limbic system, especially the amygdala, often vividly called the brain's smoke detector, shows intense, disproportionate activation.
The smoke detector, I like that.
Yeah, it's a good analogy. This system is designed, evolutionarily, to detect danger with lightning speed. Their studies showed that even 13 years after a traumatic event, like in Marcia's case, her amygdala reacted with alarm, as if the original danger were present, when she was presented with images or thoughts even subtly related to her trauma.
13 years later.
13 years. This intense amygdala activation triggers a cascade of stress hormones throughout the body: adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine spiking heart rate, blood pressure, and oxygen intake, preparing the body for fight, flight, or freeze, even when there's no immediate external danger in the present moment.
So the body is literally reacting as if the threat is happening right now, in real time, even if the conscious mind intellectually knows it's safe. It's a complete disconnect.
Exactly. And unlike normal conditions, where stress hormones quickly return to baseline once a threat has passed, in traumatized people, these hormones take much, much longer to dissipate. Worse, they spike disproportionately in response to even mildly stressful or ambiguous stimuli, keeping the body in this perpetual state of alarm. Incredibly exhausting. And this chronic physiological arousal leads to insidious, pervasive effects throughout a person's life. Profound memory and attention problems, persistent irritability, debilitating sleep disorders, and even long-term physical health issues. For example, significantly higher rates of asthma and other inflammatory conditions in traumatized children. Joseph Ledoux, a pioneering neuroscientist, explains this with his crucial low road and high road concept. The amygdala operates on the low road, a direct, lightning-fast, unconscious pathway that interprets threat and initiates a response. The high road, in contrast, involves the prefrontal cortex, which allows for slower, more conscious and nuanced interpretation of a situation. In PTSD, the amygdala's smoke detector effectively overwhelms the medial prefrontal cortex's watchtower, leading to a profound loss of conscious control, perpetual hyperarousal, or conversely a freezing or dissociative response. The brain's primitive alarm system is just overriding its rational executive functions.
And this explains why simply talking through the trauma or trying to intellectually understand it might not be enough to fix it, right? Because the brain's primitive alarm system is still screaming, operating on a completely different level than language.
Precisely. This is a critical insight. For too long, traditional psychology has often focused on helping people use insight and understanding to manage their behavior and emotions. However, neuroscience research, particularly these imaging studies, reveals a profound truth. Very few psychological problems, especially those rooted in trauma, stem from simple defects in understanding. Most originate from pressures in deeper subcortical brain regions that control our fundamental perception, attention, and physiological states. When the emotional brain's alarm bell is constantly signaling danger, operating from this primal nonverbal level, no amount of insight will silence it. It's an analogy Van der Kolk uses. It's like the participant in an anger management program who, after learning all the cognitive techniques, honestly conceded that they work terrific, as long as you're not really angry.
Right. When you need it most, it doesn't work.
Exactly. The emotional brain, steeped in the language of sensation and survival, needs a different kind of intervention to reset itself, one that speaks its own language rather than trying to reason with it intellectually.
Given that, how does trauma impact our very sense of self, our internal compass that tells us who we are, what we feel, and how we relate to the world? It sounds like this could be profoundly disrupted.
It is absolutely profoundly impaired. Van der Kolk refers to a critical network of brain regions, which he calls the mohawk of self-awareness, because of its location and shape within the brain.
The mohawk, okay.
Yeah. This includes several key areas: the orbital prefrontal cortex, the medial prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate, the posterior cingulate, and the insula. Collectively, these regions are vital for what we call interoception, the ability to sense and interpret internal bodily states like hunger, thirst, heart rate, emotional sensations. They integrate these internal signals to create our moment-to-moment sense of self, our emotional landscape, and our ability to assess the personal relevance of incoming information. In individuals with histories of chronic trauma, particularly those who experienced early prolonged abuse, these areas consistently show sharply decreased activity,
So they're less active.
much less active. This makes it incredibly difficult for them to register their internal states, to feel their feelings, or to accurately assess what is personally relevant or threatening in their environment. They struggle to know what they truly feel, or even who they are outside of the trauma.
Then they might literally not even be able to identify or name their own emotions, or distinguish between different physical sensations.
That's exactly right. This is a condition known as alexithymia, which comes from Greek words meaning no words for feelings. People are deeply out of touch with their feelings. One patient described it chillingly. My brain doesn't feel, or having a bubble bath and being burned or raped is the same feeling.
Wow, that's profound.
It is. This isn't a lack of emotion. It's a profound disconnect from the internal experience of emotion. Their brain scans consistently confirm less activity in these crucial self-sensing areas, illustrating a neurological basis for their emotional numbness. Healing, in these cases, is not just about talking. It involves the painstaking process of learning to reconnect physical sensations with emotions, building an internal map that trauma had erased or severely distorted. It's like a colorblind person slowly learning to distinguish shades of gray, differentiating subtle internal cues that others take for granted. This really highlights why body-based therapies are so crucial. They help reestablish this foundational self-sensing capacity.
That makes perfect sense, illustrating how deep the impact of trauma can go. We often think of trauma as a single catastrophic event, like a car accident or combat. But what about the ongoing insidious experiences, particularly those that happen during a child's formative years? How do these unseen scars form, and why are they so often obscured or misdiagnosed?
This is a truly critical area, often overlooked in traditional mental health. Children's horrific real-life experiences, whether it's chronic neglect, abuse, or witnessing ongoing violence, are frequently obscured by what Kolk calls a blizzard of diagnoses.
Blizzard, yeah.
Instead of identifying the underlying trauma, children are often labeled with conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, bipolar disorder, or ADHD. These labels, while describing symptoms, fail to address the root cause, leading to inappropriate treatments, often heavy medication that don't solve the core problem. Kolk actually proposes a specific, more accurate diagnosis: developmental trauma disorder. This highlights a pervasive pattern of dysregulation, profound problems with attention and concentration, and significant difficulties getting along with themselves and others. Their moods rapidly shift from explosive tantrums and panic to complete detachment and dissociation. And when they get upset, they can neither calm themselves nor coherently describe their feelings. They simply don't have the internal tools to manage their overwhelming inner states.
And this profoundly impacts their schooling and their ability to function in environments that should be supportive, actually compounding the problem.
Exactly. It's a tragic cycle. It's still standard practice in many schools to punish children for tantrums, outbursts, or inattentiveness, which are often direct, involuntary symptoms of traumatic stress. This tragically turns schools, which should be safe havens for learning and growth, into another traumatic trigger.
Making it worse.
Making it worse. Angry confrontations, suspensions, or detentions might temporarily halt behaviors, but they do absolutely nothing to address the underlying alarm system that's constantly activated. Instead of understanding and support, these children receive further punishment, reinforcing their sense of being bad or unlovable. The alternative, and what truly works, is to acknowledge the child's distress, to help them calm their overwhelmed physiology, to gently explore the cause of their behavior, and to find solutions, like simply offering a warm blanket to a melting down first grader to help them self-regulate. This shifts the focus from external control and punishment to internal understanding and compassionate support.
So much of a child's early development relies on their caregivers to provide that sense of safety and predictability. How do our earliest relationships shape our vulnerability and resilience to trauma throughout our lives?
This brings us to John Bowlby's groundbreaking work on attachment theory. His radical claim in the mid-20th century was that disturbed child behavior is a direct, understandable response to actual experiences of neglect, brutality, or separation from caregivers, rather than just being internal fantasies or inherent pathology.
It's about what actually happened.
It's about what actually happened. Central to this theory is the concept of attunement, that subtle, rhythmic dance of give and take between a caregiver and child. This attuned interaction, starting at the most subtle physical and emotional levels, lays the fundamental groundwork for a baby's sense of self and their ability to feel real and connected, as Donald Winnicott described. This consistent attunement fosters pleasure, deep connection, and a fundamental sense of safety, knowing that someone reliable is there to meet your needs and help regulate your emotions. Trauma, in this profound context, is when this crucial, delicate system of attunement fails consistently and catastrophically.
And that failure often involves immobilization, right? The inability for a child to fight or flee or even to express their distress, which then gets internalized.
Precisely. Trauma often occurs when the child is physically and emotionally immobilized, rendered helpless in the face of overwhelming threat. This could be witnessing domestic violence where they can do nothing, or being unable to fight off an abuser, or simply having a caregiver who is so chronically unresponsive that the child gives up trying to connect. In such extreme situations of perceived inescapable danger, the dorsal vagal complex, or DVC, which is the most ancient part of the reptilian brain's ultimate emergency system, takes over. Yeah. This is the playing dead response. It leads to a zombie-like dissociation, fainting, or even physiological collapse, where awareness is shut down and physical pain may not even be consciously registered. The normal state for mammals is to be somewhat on guard, but to feel emotionally close, that defensive system was temporarily shut down, allowing for connection. Trauma prevents this. It leaves individuals trapped in a state of hypervigilance, constantly scanning for danger, or conversely in a state of profound numbness, unable to enjoy life's pleasures or even recognize real danger when it's present. They're just stuck in a survival mode that robs them of true living.
So if childhood is meant to be a source of safety and security, what happens when it's instead a pervasive source of terror? And how does that manifest in complex coping mechanisms that persist later in life?
Mary Ainsworth and Mary May, the groundbreaking strange situation studies, provide profound insights into this. They identify different attachment styles that emerge from early caregiver interactions: secure, avoidant, anxious, and disorganized. Disorganized attachment is particularly intertwined with early pervasive trauma. These are children whose mothers are often either too preoccupied with their own unresolved issues to truly attune to their infants, sometimes being intrusive and hostile, or conversely, emotionally absent, helpless, and fearful, utterly unable to comfort their distressed children.
So unpredictable and frightening.
Exactly. This inconsistent, frightening, or neglectful dynamic leaves children with a vulnerable physiology, meaning their nervous systems are constantly on high alert or shut down, making it much harder for them to self-regulate and regain equilibrium after any stressful experience, let alone a traumatic one. Their internal alarm system is perpetually miscalibrated.
And these deeply ingrained patterns of attachment can persist almost unconsciously well into adulthood, affecting all future relationships, can't they?
Absolutely. The patterns established in early childhood are remarkably persistent. Anxious toddlers, constantly seeking reassurance but never quite finding it, often become anxious adults who struggle with insecurity in relationships. Avoidant toddlers, who learn to suppress their needs to avoid rejection, might grow into adults who are out of touch with their own feelings and those of others, sometimes even becoming bullies, with anxious children as their victims, perpetuating the cycle.
It just keeps going.
It does. It's a persistent, often unconscious way of coping with unresolved early relational trauma. Consider the poignant story of Jack, a child who went to almost any lengths to feel seen and connected. He would tell staff with this kind of desperate delight that police knew him from break-ins, yelling, "Oh my God, it's Jack again, that little motherfucker." He
Yeah.
confessed, that is what makes it worthwhile.
Wow. Just to be seen.
Just to be seen. Imagine being a child and not having a consistent source of safety, making your way into the world unprotected and unseen, so desperate for any form of recognition that even negative attention from the police feels worthwhile. That profound search for recognition, even if it's destructive, highlights an almost unimaginable need for connection and validation.
That's a heartbreaking example of the human need for connection, just completely distorted by early trauma. And the implications of this extend far beyond individual stories. The ACE study, for instance, revealed a shocking and widespread truth about the impact of adverse childhood experiences on public health. What exactly did that study uncover about this childhood vulnerability?
The Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACE, study, a landmark public health study, uncovered a truly shocking truth. Traumatic life experiences during childhood and adolescence are far more common than expected. And this wasn't just about specific vulnerable populations in impoverished neighborhoods. The study respondents were predominantly white, middle class, middle-aged, well-educated, and had good medical insurance. Yet only one-third reported no adverse childhood experiences.
Only a third.
Only a third. That means two-thirds had at least one. More than a quarter reported parental physical abuse, and over 1 in 10 reported frequent verbal abuse. This implies that more than a quarter of the U.S. population is likely to have been repeatedly physically abused as a child, revealing this huge, hidden epidemic.
And the long-term health consequences found in that study are equally staggering, linking childhood experiences directly to adult illnesses, right?
Yes, the impact on adult health is profound and far-reaching, illustrating how the body truly does keep the score. Dr. Vincent Felitti, who initiated the ACE study at Kaiser Permanente, made a startling discovery during his work with patients struggling with morbid obesity.
Yeah.
He found a very strong, almost universal link. Most of his morbidly obese patients had been sexually abused as children.
Wow.
This wasn't just about weight. It revealed a host of other complex family problems and often led to self-soothing behaviors, including compulsive eating as a way to cope with deep emotional pain. The long-term effects of childhood physical and sexual abuse are extensive. Trouble concentrating, being constantly on edge, that's hypervigilance, profound self-loathing, significant difficulty with intimate relationships, disturbing memory gaps, self-destructive behaviors, and a myriad of chronic medical problems like chronic pain, irritable bowel syndrome, asthma, and autoimmune disorders. And Kolk emphasizes a crucial distinction here. These severe and pervasive symptoms are relatively rare in survivors of natural disasters or single-incident traumas. This highlights that it's the chronic, relational nature of childhood, abuse, the betrayal by caregivers, the inescapable terror that inflicts the deepest and most enduring scars because it fundamentally attacks the child's sense of safety, trust, and self-worth.
And now, with the advent of epigenetics, we're even seeing how these early stressful experiences literally get under the skin, affecting our very genetic makeup, showing how deeply trauma is embodied.
Precisely. The emerging field of epigenetics is revealing that stressful experiences can profoundly affect gene expression in humans, not by changing the underlying DNA sequence, but by turning genes on or off or modulating their activity.
Like dimmer switches.
It's exactly like dimmer switches. This means that while you might inherit certain genes, how those genes express themselves can be significantly influenced by your environment and experiences, particularly in early life. For example, a study showed that children whose pregnant mothers were trapped in unheated houses during a prolonged ice storm, experiencing extreme stress, showed major epigenetic changes compared to those whose heat was restored quickly. More directly related to trauma, research has found that abused children, regardless of social class, share specific modifications in 73 genes associated with stress response and brain development.
73 genes.
Yeah. This scientific breakthrough clearly demonstrates how trauma is truly in the body. It's not just a psychological or emotional wound, but one that influences biological processes and can literally alter how our genes behave. This profoundly shifts the nature versus nurture debate, showing how deeply intertwined they are and underscoring that our early environment can leave a biological blueprint.
So, if this is so widespread and deeply ingrained, affecting our biology itself, what does this all mean for our collective approach to well-being as a society? What are the broader societal implications of this research?
Well, it leads to a stark, often uncomfortable contrast in societal outcomes. Consider the incarceration rates. Norway's is remarkably low at 71 per 100,000 people, and the Netherlands is 81 per 100,000. In stark comparison, the U.S. rate is a staggering 781 per 100,000, one of the highest in the world.
Huge difference.
Huge. Crime rates are dramatically lower in those northern European countries, and their healthcare costs are about half of ours. We also know that a significant percentage, nearly 70%, of prisoners in California, for instance, spent time in foster care, a system that often fails to provide stable, nurturing environments. The U.S. currently spends a colossal $84 billion annually on incarceration, approximately $44,000 per prisoner per year. Meanwhile, countries like Norway and the Netherlands prioritize early intervention, investing heavily in helping parents raise children in safe, predictable, and supportive surroundings from the outset. Their academic test scores and lower crime rates seem to directly reflect the success of these proactive investments. It strongly suggests that a societal focus on creating early protective environments yields far better societal returns in terms of public health, safety, and well-being than a reactive, punitive system that only addresses the symptoms of unresolved trauma. This highlights a critical, long-standing gap in systemic support for traumatized children in the U.S., a gap so profound that the National Child Traumatic Stress Network NCTSN, was only formally established as recently as 2001, indicating how late we've been to recognize this widespread issue.
It's clear that the path to healing is incredibly complex and needs to be holistic, addressing these deep, multifaceted impacts. For so long, talk therapy was often seen as the primary, even sole, approach to dealing with emotional distress and past wounds. Where does it fall short when it comes to trauma, and how can it be made more effective?
Traditional therapy has long operated with an undying faith in the capacity of talk to resolve trauma, a belief that traces back to Freud and Breuer in 1893. They theorized that by bringing repressed memories to light and articulating overwhelming feelings, that trauma would immediately and permanently disappear.
If only it were that simple.
Exactly. Kolk stresses that the reality is it's not so simple. The limitations are significant. Traumatic events are almost impossible to put into words because, as we discussed, they're often encoded as preverbal body memories. Language cannot substitute for action or the primal sensations of terror and helplessness. Even if a coherent story is laboriously constructed, it doesn't always resolve the debilitating flashbacks, improve concentration, or reduce the hypersensitivity that plagues survivors. In fact, simply trying to talk through a traumatic memory can actually reactivate the brain's alarm system, knocking out critical prefrontal areas needed for integration and narrative processing.
Making things worse, potentially.
Yeah, often leading to patients reliving the trauma rather than resolving it, making them feel worse, not better.
But despite those limitations, the act of naming the experience, of being heard and understood, still seems incredibly important, even if not sufficient on its own. There's a real power in it, isn't there?
Absolutely. The power of naming and being witnessed is undeniable and profoundly therapeutic. Feeling listened to and understood changes our physiology. It literally helps to calm the nervous system. Being able to articulate a complex, previously unspeakable feeling and having it recognized and validated by another person lights up our limbic brain and creates an aha moment. It shifts a diffuse, overwhelming internal state into something that can be shared and processed. As the eminent attachment theorist John Bowlby famously put it, what cannot be spoken to the mother cannot be told to the self.
Powerful.
It implies that without a safe, attuned listener in our formative years, parts of our experience remain unintegrated, unself-known. Think of Helen Keller's famous breakthrough moment with Anne Sullivan. Her tactual memories and internal world were isolated and chaotic until language opened up a shared world, a community, for her. She wrote that through language she was able to feel at home in the great world. This beautifully captures the essence of a therapeutic relationship, finding words where they were absent, sharing the deepest pain, and healing the profound isolation that is at the heart of trauma. True, full communication is, in essence, the very opposite of being traumatized.
So it's about the context and safety in which the talking happens, not just the talking itself. Finding those safe spaces sounds paramount.
Precisely. Finding truly safe spaces is critical, which is why survivor groups like Alcoholics Anonymous AA and Adult Children of Alcoholics ACOA are so incredibly important. They offer a responsive, understanding community where one's deepest truth can be told without judgment and where shared experience fosters profound connection. Professional therapists are also vital, but they must be trained to listen to the agonizing details of trauma without flinching. And crucially, they must have done their own intensive therapy.
They need to be able to handle it.
Right. This allows them to take care of themselves emotionally and remain truly present and emotionally available to patients, even when the stories they hear arouse deep rage or revulsion. This emotional regulation in the therapist creates a safe container for the patient. Writing can also be a profoundly powerful pathway to healing. It allows individuals to go into a sort of a trance state, accessing and connecting the self-observing and narrative parts of their brain without the immediate pressure of external judgment. James Pennebaker's extensive studies show that when subjects discussed intimate, traumatic topics, there were measurable changes in their tone of voice and even handwriting, suggesting a deeper, embodied expression was occurring. Interestingly, a study combining expressive movement plus writing showed even better physical health and GPA outcomes than writing alone.
Movement plus writing.
Yeah, suggesting that the mere expression of the trauma is not sufficient. Health does appear to require translating experiences into language. It's the active integration of body and mind through expressive action and words that proves most beneficial.
Moving on to another approach, pharmaceuticals offered what was once seen as a pharmacological revolution in mental health treatment, a promise to fix underlying chemical imbalances. What have we truly learned about their role in healing trauma, and what are their limitations?
There was certainly initial immense optimism in psychiatric treatment, driven by the idea that human misery could be conquered by correcting chemical imbalances.
Uh-huh.
Medications like lithium and clozeril, for instance, showed miraculous results for some chronic patients, reducing psychotic symptoms and stabilizing moods. And SSRIs, like Prozac, have indeed made a substantial contribution to treating trauma-related disorders. They work by increasing serotonin in the brain, which can significantly reduce reactivity to triggers, offering patients a sense of perspective, a slight emotional distance from overwhelming feelings, and considerable control over impulses. As the neuroscientist Jeffrey Gray theorized, when serotonin levels rise, many patients become less reactive to threat cues and can gain a degree of self-regulation. For some, this can be a crucial first step in finding the stability needed to engage in other forms of therapy.
But there's a significant downside to relying solely or even primarily on medication for trauma, isn't there? It seems to risk masking the problem rather than resolving it.
A very serious one, and Kolk is quite clear on this. Medications, while offering symptomatic relief, may deflect attention from dealing with the underlying issues.
Yeah.
This is a major concern because it can effectively take control over people's fate out of their own hands and place it instead with doctors and insurance companies, fostering passivity rather than agency.
Right, just managing symptoms.
Exactly. The statistics are telling. Despite antidepressant use tripling over the past 3 decades, hospital admissions for depression have decreased, indicating that these drugs aren't a standalone solution that eliminates the core problem. Furthermore, antipsychotics, while effective at dampening emotional responses and reducing intense rage, come with severe downsides. They can interfere with one's ability to appreciate subtle pleasures, cause significant weight gain, lead to diabetes, induce physical inertia, and tragically, deepen a sense of alienation and disconnect from one's own body and emotions. Alarmingly, Kolk points out that they are often misused in children misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder, interfering with age-appropriate skills development and the formation of crucial friendships, hindering their natural growth pathways. And benzodiazepines, another class of tranquilizers, are generally avoided due to their high addiction potential and their tendency to simply numb rather than heal. The brain disease model, while offering some pharmacological solutions, risks obscuring the deeper, contextual, and often traumatic causes of mental suffering, leading to a focus on managing symptoms rather than resolving their root.
So if the body keeps the score, how do we help it literally release that burden, that frozen past, rather than just talking about it or medicating it? What are some of these bottom-up or somatic approaches to healing?
This is where some of the most profound breakthroughs in trauma treatment are occurring, focusing on what Kolk calls limbic system therapy. Essentially, repairing the brain's faulty alarm systems by working directly with the body's internal sensations and physiological responses. Techniques like somatic experiencing, developed by Peter Levine, and sensoromotor psychotherapy, pioneered by Pat Ogden, are designed to allow the body to have experiences that deeply and viscerally contradict the helplessness, rage, or collapse that resulted from the original trauma.
Contradict the original feeling.
Exactly. Rather than just recounting a story, patients are gently guided to physically experience what it would have felt like to fight back, to run away, or to complete a defensive action that was thwarted during the trauma. This can involve subtle movements, tracking internal sensations, called the felt sense, and allowing the body to naturally discharge trapped energy through trembles or sighs. When the body gets to complete these actions, it leads to a profound sense of relaxation and completion, what's often described as the pleasure of completed action, literally rewiring the nervous system's response to threat.
So it's like physically reenacting a fight or flight response, not to relive it, but to reprogram the body's deeply ingrained survival response.
Exactly, but in a controlled, titrated way, never re-traumatizing. A powerful, tangible example is the model mugging program. This self-defense program teaches women and men to recondition the freeze response that often occurs during an assault. Participants repeatedly practice fighting off simulated attacks by a padded assailant, transforming their ingrained fear and helplessness into positive, assertive fighting energy. The program emerged after a black belt in karate was raped, realizing that her training abandoned her in the face of terror, literally de-skilling her. Model mugging teaches the body to respond actively rather than freezing, building a felt sense of competence and agency.
Building that muscle memory for action.
Precisely. Another immensely powerful somatic approach is yoga. A landmark study showed that just 10 weeks of trauma-informed yoga practice markedly reduced PTSD symptoms in patients who had been unresponsive to medication or other traditional treatments. Annie's story beautifully illustrates this. Her yoga practice, initially terrifying, as it involved looking inward and feeling her own body, eventually led to her realizing, your body has things to say, and she learned to listen to its signals. This practice not only helped her recognize and express her feelings more, but also significantly improved her heart rate variability, HRV, which is a key physiological measure of how flexibly and adaptably your nervous system can respond to stress. High HRV indicates a healthy, resilient nervous system.
And mindfulness plays a central role here, too, it seems, in connecting to those internal sensations.
Yes, absolutely. John Kabat-Zinn's pioneering mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR, offers a powerful, accessible tool for trauma survivors. He describes mindfulness as a lens that takes the mind's scattered and reactive energies, which are so common in trauma, and focuses them into a coherent source for living, for problem-solving, for healing. It teaches individuals to observe sensations, thoughts, and emotions without judgment, crucial for trauma survivors who often struggle with overwhelming or numb internal states. By simply noticing rather than reacting, they begin to create a space between stimulus and response, reclaiming agency.
Creating that pause.
Exactly. Finally, sensory integration, particularly through firm, reassuring touch or deep pressure, helps individuals feel their body boundaries and a sense of safety. This is especially vital for those who feel profoundly disconnected from their bodies or who are constantly on guard, by allowing them to discover that their body is solid, predictable, and that they don't have to be perpetually wary of their own internal landscape or the external world.
It's incredible to think we can literally rewire our brains. Can we actually train our brains to be less reactive to trauma through technology? That sounds almost like science fiction.
It sounds like it, but it's real, and it's called neurofeedback. This cutting-edge technology directly intervenes in the specific brain circuitry that promotes and sustains states of fear, shame, and rage, the very patterns established by trauma. By allowing patients to see their own brainwave activity in real time, often represented visually or audibly on a screen, they can learn to subtly change these habitual, dysregulated brain patterns created by trauma.
So they're seeing their brainwaves.
Yeah, essentially. This process stabilizes the brain, increases its resiliency, and crucially allows for more choices in how to respond to stress rather than being locked into automatic trauma-driven reactions. As Frank Duffy, a neuroscientist, commented, if any medication had demonstrated such a wide spectrum of efficacy, it would be universally accepted and widely used.
High praise.
Very high praise. Neurofeedback helps significantly with hyperarousal, confusion, concentration problems, and it's now being used effectively in military and VA facilities across the country for PTSD, offering a non-pharmacological pathway to brain regulation.
What kind of profound transformations have you seen with neurofeedback, especially for those who seem to be beyond help?
The transformations can be truly profound. Consider Lisa, a young woman so severely traumatized by childhood abuse that she could not recognize herself in a mirror and often blacked out, waking in strange, unfamiliar situations with no memory of how she got there. She described constant anxiety around attachment, trying to survive by painstakingly memorizing every detail about people in rooms out of fear, a desperate attempt to predict danger.
Wow, that sounds exhausting.
Unbelievably so. After neurofeedback sessions, her entire world shifted. She recounted, "Now I know people in a different way. It's not based on memorizing them out of fear. When you're not afraid of being hurt, you can know people differently, really connect." She emerged with remarkable clarity and focus, no longer afraid of being hurt or losing herself. A specific neurofeedback procedure called alpha-theta training can be particularly effective. It induces hypnagogic or trance-like states where the conscious mind quiets down, allowing for deeper access to unconscious processes. This loosens conditioned responses to trauma triggers, like loud cracks signaling gunfire, opening the mind to new possibilities where the present is no longer automatically interpreted as a continuous reliving of the past. It's retraining the brain at its deepest, most fundamental level.
Beyond the individual brain, how do community and creative expression play an equally vital, sometimes even more potent role in healing what words alone cannot touch?
Art, music, and dance are powerful healing modalities, precisely because they circumvent the speechlessness that comes with terror. They offer immediate visceral pathways for expression beyond words, beyond logic, allowing for direct emotional release and processing. We saw the profound impact of communal rhythms during Archbishop Desmond Tutu's Truth and Reconciliation Commission in post-apartheid South Africa. When witnesses became overwhelmed while recounting horrific atrocities, Tutu would lead the entire audience in collective singing and dancing until they could regain composure and eventually find words.
Using rhythm to regulate.
Exactly. This allowed participants to pendulate in and out of reliving their horror, a safe collective rhythm grounding them as they navigated their pain and eventually found a voice for it. Similarly, Jack Panksepp described Estonia's singing revolution, where hundreds of thousands of people sang forbidden patriotic songs in unison, a powerful act of collective expression that ultimately led to their independence without bloodshed, demonstrating the sheer undeniable force of communal rhythms to create collective agency and transformation.
So collective expression can actually be a political force and a therapeutic force. What about more structured creative outlets like therapeutic theater? How does that specifically aid trauma healing?
Therapeutic theater programs like Urban Improv in Boston, the Possibility Project in New York, and Shakespeare and Company's Shakespeare in the Courts are showing truly remarkable results with traumatized youth and adults.
Oh,
Traumatized people are often terrified to feel deeply because emotions can lead to a perceived loss of control, mirroring the helplessness of their trauma.
right, the fear of being overwhelmed again.
Precisely. In stark contrast, theater is all about embodying emotions, giving voice to them, becoming rhythmically engaged, taking on and embodying different roles. The essence of trauma is feeling God-forsaken, this profound sense of isolation and uniqueness and suffering. But theater offers a collective confrontation with the human condition, fostering connection and shared humanity. Foster kids, for instance, naturally relate to the universal tragedies of Shakespeare's Lear or Othello, finding their own struggles reflected in timeless narratives, realizing they are not alone in their pain.
And it seems like it's not just about emotional expression, but also about building a sense of competence and trust within a group, which is so often shattered by trauma.
Absolutely. The focus in these programs shifts from merely expressing pain to a powerful question. How can I become the best actor, singer, dancer? This pursuit of competence is truly the best defense against the helplessness of trauma. When you've been rendered helpless, developing mastery and skill, whether on stage or in a physical challenge, restores agency and self-worth.
Feeling capable again.
Exactly. Trust exercises, like a blindfolded walk where one person guides another through obstacles, build crucial connection and safety among participants. Relationships that are deeply challenging but profoundly healing for those who've experienced betrayal and profound isolation. Urban Improv, for example, documented significantly fewer fights and more cooperation among students in schools where their programs were implemented. Initially, students acting in skits would often side with aggressors, seemingly unable to tolerate weakness or vulnerability in their peers. But over time, as they gained competence and trust, they experimented with empathy and vulnerability in their roles. The story of a chronic runaway playing Ophelia in Hamlet, showing up night after night despite extreme nervousness, committing to her performance and her castmates, powerfully illustrates the transformative power of commitment, shared purpose, and embodied performance. This entire approach echoes the profound South African concept of Ubuntu. My humanity is inextricably bound up in yours.
Ubuntu.
Yes, true healing, Kolk argues, is impossible without the recognition and embrace of our common humanity.
We've journeyed through the intricate and often invisible ways trauma shapes us, from our individual stories to the very architecture of our brains, and then really the profound fabric of our communities. It's abundantly clear that healing is not a single linear path, but a dynamic, multifaceted process that touches every part of our being.
Yeah, the core message that really emerges from this deep dive is a powerful one. True healing involves far more than just intellectually understanding the past or simply talking about it. It's about restoring a fundamental sense of agency, learning to regulate our bodies and nervous systems, re-engaging our innate capacity for imagination and play, fostering secure attachments with others, and building supportive, compassionate communities. And the brain's inherent neuroplasticity offers profound and enduring hope for transformation, emphasizing that we are absolutely not condemned by our past experiences.
So, here's a thought to carry with you from this deep dive. If our bodies truly keep the score, holding echoes of every experience, what stories might yours be subtly trying to tell you, perhaps beyond the realm of conscious thought? And what new embodied experiences could help you begin to rewrite those stories, to reclaim your present and reshape your future?
Maybe consider how you might explore this for yourself, even in small, gentle ways. Is there a way you can engage your body more intentionally, maybe through movement, breath, or just mindful awareness? Can you reach out to connect with others in ways that foster a deeper sense of safety and belonging? Or can you simply allow yourself to feel more fully, to notice the subtle signals from within, trusting that your body holds wisdom and a pathway toward greater integration and peace?
We really hope this deep dive has offered you a clearer understanding and perhaps a new, expansive perspective on the profound journey of healing from trauma. Remember, the road of recovery is truly the road of life itself, a continuous unfolding.
Thank you for joining us at Wisdom House, where we bring you timeless insights from the greatest books. If you found this deep dive valuable, Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Wisdom House. Stay curious, stay inspired, and we'll see you in the next video.